Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today for a story that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. This is The Unseen Guest, a tale about a night alone in a storm that turned into something far more sinister than I could have imagined. It's a memory from my childhood that's stuck with me, blending the innocence of youth with a creeping dread that never quite let go. What started as a simple night at home became a brush with something or someone that I still can't fully explain. So, grab a blanket, maybe keep a light on, and let's dive into the night that changed how I see the dark forever. I was about 9 years old, in the 3rd grade, living in a small, sleepy town where nothing ever seemed to happen. My family's house sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, bordered by a dense patch of woods that always looked a little too wild, even in the daylight. It was one of those places where the trees seemed to lean in, whispering secrets to each other when the wind blew. That night, a storm had been brewing all day, the kind that made the sky look bruised, with heavy gray clouds piling up like they were ready to burst. By the time school let out, the rain was coming down in sheets, drumming against the car as my mom drove me home. She and my dad had plans that evening. Some fancy event downtown, a fundraiser, or maybe a work dinner. I don't quite remember. What I do recall is the way they rushed around the house. My mom in a sleek black dress, my dad fumbling with his tie, both of them distracted but trying to act like everything was fine. They were supposed to be back by midnight, they said, and I was thrilled at the idea of having the house to myself for a few hours. At 9, that felt like winning the lottery. No bedtime, no rules, just me and a stash of candy I'd hidden in my room. They left me with a list of instructions, the kind parents give when they're nervous but don't want to show it. Lock the doors. Check the windows. Keep the porch light on. Don't open the door for anyone. I nodded along, barely listening, my mind already on the bag of gummy worms tucked under my bed. The rain was pounding harder as they pulled out of the driveway, their headlights cutting through the downpour before disappearing into the gray haze. I stood at the living room window watching the world blur outside, feeling a mix of excitement and something else. Maybe a tiny flicker of unease, though I didn't recognize it at the time. The house felt bigger without them, the rooms stretching out in a way that made every creak and groan of the old wood seem louder. I shook it off, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and plopped onto the couch, flipping on the TV to some cartoon reruns. The living room was cozy enough, with its faded green sofa and the warm glow of a lamp in the corner, but the storm outside was relentless. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and every now and then, a crack of thunder would make me jump, even though I told myself I wasn't scared. Hours passed, and I was deep into my second bag of candy, the TV blaring some show about talking animals. I hadn't bothered with my mom's checklist yet. Why would I? I wasn't planning on going to bed anytime soon. The sugar was keeping me wired, and I felt like the king of my own little kingdom. But at some point, the sugar high crashed, and my eyelids got heavy. The last thing I remember was the TV flickering, the sound fading into a dull hum as I drifted off on the couch, the rain still hammering outside. When I woke up, it was dark. Too dark. The TV had gone into sleep mode, its screen a blank void, and the house was eerily quiet, except for the steady drone of the rain. I blinked, disoriented, my body stiff from lying awkwardly on the couch. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It wasn't just a chill. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, like the house had forgotten how to hold warmth. I pulled the throw blanket tighter around me, frowning. The heater was supposed to be on, wasn't it? I glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands glowing faintly in the dark. It was past 2 a.m. I'd been out for hours. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess. The cold was nagging at me, more than it should have. I told myself it was just the storm, maybe a draft from a window I'd forgotten to check. But the air felt wrong, heavy in a way I couldn't explain. I remembered my mom's instructions then, the ones I'd ignored in my candy-fueled rebellion. Lock the doors. Check the windows. Keep a light on. Guilt crept in, mixing with a growing sense of unease. I didn't want to get in trouble, not when they'd trusted me to handle things. So, I forced myself off the couch, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and started making my rounds. I checked the front door first, twisting the deadbolt until it clicked. The back door was next secure. I tugged at the windows in the living room, then the kitchen, making sure each one was latched tight. Everything was as it should be, but the cold didn't let up. If anything, it felt worse, like the house was holding its breath. I even pressed my hand against the glass of the kitchen window, half expecting to feel a draft. But it was sealed shut, the rain streaking down outside like tears. I flipped on the hallway light, its weak yellow glow pushing back the shadows just enough to make me feel a little braver. But as I stood there, listening to the storm rage outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every little sound. A drip from the faucet, the hum of the fridge, the faint groan of the floorboards settling. Or was it settling? I froze, my heart picking up speed. There it was again. A soft creak. Not from the storm, not from the wind, but from somewhere inside. It was faint, almost swallowed by the rain. But it was there. I told myself it was nothing. Just the house, just my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something about that sound felt alive, deliberate, like it didn't belong. I stood there, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter, my eyes darting to the dark hallway that led to the stairs. The storm roared outside, but it was the silence inside that scared me most. The creak came again, sharper this time, slicing through the drone of the rain like a knife. I stood rooted to the spot, my fingers gripping the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles ached. The sound wasn't loud, but it was distinct, a slow, deliberate groan of wood from somewhere upstairs. My first thought was the house. Old houses creak, right? They settle, they shift, especially in a storm like this. But this wasn't the random pop of a floorboard or the sigh of a wall. It had a rhythm, almost like footsteps, cautious and uneven, as if someone was trying not to be heard. My heart thudded in my chest, a dull thump that seemed to echo in the quiet. I was 9, not stupid. I knew the difference between a house settling and something moving. I glanced at the hallway light, its weak glow barely reaching the staircase. The darkness beyond it seemed thicker now, like it was pressing against the edges of the light, waiting for a chance to spill over. I told myself to calm down, to think logically. Maybe it was a branch scraping the roof, or the wind pushing against the attic hatch. But the sound came again, closer, from the direction of the upstairs landing. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't the wind. My mouth went dry, and I realized I was holding my breath, afraid that even the smallest sound would give me away. To what? I didn't know yet. I edged toward the hallway, my bare feet sticking to the cold floor. The cartoon jingle from the TV was long gone, replaced by the relentless patter of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. I wanted to turn on every light in the house, to banish the shadows, but I was afraid to move too quickly. What if something heard me? What if it was waiting? I reached the base of the stairs and peered up into the darkness. The staircase curved slightly, hiding the landing from view. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A weight in the air, like the house was watching me back. I thought about my parents, probably laughing at their fancy event, oblivious to the fact that their kid was standing here, frozen, trying to decide if the house was haunted or if I was just losing it. I remembered a story my friend Tommy had told at school, about how his cousin saw a ghost in their attic, a shadowy figure that moved when the lights were off. I'd laughed it off then, called it fake, but now it didn't seem so funny. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. Ghosts weren't real, but people were, and people could be dangerous. I thought about the news stories my mom sometimes watched, about break-ins and strangers who weren't supposed to be in your house. My stomach twisted. I hadn't checked every room before falling asleep. The back door was locked, the windows were shut, but what about the basement? Or the guest room? I hadn't even thought to look. I took a step back, my hand brushing against the wall, and that's when the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence, making me jump so hard I nearly tripped. It was the old landline in the kitchen, its ring echoing off the walls like a scream. I ran to it, my socks sliding on the floor, and snatched the receiver up, my hands shaking. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. It was my mom, her voice crackly but familiar, asking if I was okay, apologizing again for not coming home. I wanted to tell her about the noise, about how scared I was, but the words stuck in my throat. She trusted me to handle things, and I didn't want to sound like a baby. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile into my voice. She ran through her list again, doors, windows, lights, and I nodded along, muttering, while my eyes darted to the staircase. I couldn't tell her I hadn't done everything right away, that I'd been too busy with candy and cartoons. She'd be mad, or worse, she'd worry. When she hung up, the silence came back, heavier than before. The creak didn't return, but that didn't make me feel better. It was like whatever was up there was listening, waiting for me to let my guard down. I set the phone down and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the kind my dad used when the power went out. Its beam was strong, cutting through the dimness like a blade. I pointed it at the stairs, half expecting to see something staring back, but there was nothing, just the faded carpet and the banister gleaming faintly in the light. I told myself I had to check, had to be sure. If I didn't, I'd never sleep and my mom would know I'd messed up. I took a deep breath, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, and started up the stairs. Each step felt like a betrayal, like I was walking into something I wasn't supposed to see. The air grew colder as I climbed, the storm's roar muffled by the walls. At the landing, I swung the flashlight around, illuminating the hallway. My bedroom door was at the end, closed just as I'd left it. But the guest room door, the one we never used, was slightly ajar. My heart stopped. I was sure I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gone near it since last summer when my cousins visited. I stood there, the flashlight trembling in my hand, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind had pushed it open. Maybe the house was just old. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong, and I was about to find out what. The guest room door hung open just enough to show a sliver of darkness beyond, like a crack in the world that wasn't supposed to be there. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand, painting jittery circles on the wall. My 9-year-old brain was screaming at me to run, to bolt back downstairs and hide under the couch, but I couldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the carpet, my body caught between fear and the stubborn need to prove I wasn't scared. I kept telling myself it was nothing, maybe the door had always been like that and I just hadn't noticed. But I knew that wasn't true. I'd walked past that door 100 times and it was always shut tight, the brass knob dull from disuse. Now it was open and the cold air spilling out felt alive, like it was reaching for me. I took a step forward, then stopped, my breath hitching. The storm outside was still raging, the rain hammering the roof, but it was the silence in the house that was deafening. No more creaks, no more groans, just a heavy waiting quiet that made my skin crawl. I swung the flashlight toward my bedroom door, hoping it would look normal, safe, but even that felt wrong now. The hallway seemed longer than it should, the shadows stretching in ways that didn't match the light. I thought about calling out like they do in movies, but the idea of breaking the silence terrified me. What if something answered? What if it wasn't a what, but a who? I edged closer to the guest room, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. I didn't want to look inside, but I had to. If I didn't, I'd spend the rest of the night imagining things, and that was almost worse. I held the flashlight out like a shield, its beam cutting through the dark as I nudged the door open with my foot. The hinges groaned, a low, mournful sound that made me flinch. The room was empty, or at least it looked that way. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn tight, the air stale and cold. But something felt off, like the room was holding its breath. I stepped inside, sweeping the light across the walls, the dresser, the closet. That's when I saw it, the closet door was open, too, just a crack, just enough to show a sliver of black inside. My stomach dropped. I was certain that closet had been closed. I remembered my mom complaining about it sticking, how she'd had to yank it shut the last time she'd cleaned in here. Now it was open and I could feel something watching me from inside even though I couldn't see it. I wanted to run but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped in that moment, caught between wanting to know and wanting to forget. I took a shaky step toward the closet, the flashlight beam trembling. The air grew colder, sharper, like it was biting at my skin. I reached out, my hand hovering over the closet door when a loud crack of thunder shook the house. I yelped, dropping the flashlight. It hit the floor with a thud, the beam spinning wildly before going out. Darkness swallowed the room. I scrambled to my knees, fumbling for the flashlight, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The storm roared outside, but inside it was just me and the dark. I found the flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it at the closet. The door was still ajar, but now it seemed wider, like it had moved while I wasn't looking. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I stood up, my legs shaky, and backed toward the door. I wasn't going to open that closet. Not tonight, not ever. I turned and hurried back to the hallway, my heart racing. I needed to get to my room, lock the door, and wait for my parents. That was the plan. But as I reached my bedroom door, I heard it again, the creak, slow and deliberate, coming from the guest room. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting back down the hall. Nothing. Just the open door, mocking me. I pushed into my room, slamming the door shut and twisting the lock. My room was supposed to be safe, my sanctuary with its posters of superheroes and the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. But it didn't feel safe now. The window rattled in its frame, the rain pounding against it like fists. I climbed onto my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, the flashlight clutched tight. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just the storm, just my imagination. But then I heard it, a faint, scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor, coming from the direction of my closet. My closet. I hadn't checked it. I hadn't even thought to look. And now, as I stared at the closed door, I realized it wasn't closed anymore. It was open, just a crack, just enough to show a sliver of darkness inside. I stared at the closet door, my breath caught in my throat, the flashlight beam locked on that thin strip of darkness. It was open, only a fraction, but enough to make my skin prickle with dread. I was sure I'd closed it before I went downstairs earlier. I always closed it. I hated the way the closet loomed in the corner of my room, its shadow swallowing the light even during the day. Now, in the middle of the night, with the storm raging outside, that crack felt like a doorway to something I didn't want to meet. My mind raced, conjuring images of monsters from the comics I read, their claws reaching out from the dark. But this wasn't a comic. This was my room, my house, and something was wrong. I slid off the bed, my feet hitting the carpet with a soft thud. The flashlight felt heavy in my hand, its beam unsteady as I pointed it at the closet. I wanted to call out, to demand whatever was there to show itself, but my voice was gone, stuck somewhere deep in my chest. The rain pounded harder, the wind howling like it was trying to tear the house apart. A flash of lightning lit up the room, casting sharp shadows across the walls. For a split second, I thought I saw something move inside the closet, a flicker of motion, too quick to be sure. My heart lurched and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my sneakers on the floor. I told myself it was nothing, just the light playing tricks, but the fear was real, clawing at my insides. I thought about running downstairs, hiding under the dining room table like I used to when I was younger and scared of thunderstorms. But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 9, practically grown, and my parents had trusted me to stay home alone. I couldn't let them down. I took a shaky step toward the closet, the flashlight beam cutting through the dark like a blade. The air felt colder the closer I got, like the closet was breathing out winter. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the doorknob. It was ice cold, stinging my fingers. I yanked my hand back, my breath hitching. That's when I heard it, a low, scraping sound like nails dragging across wood coming from inside. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor, its beam spinning wildly before settling on the ceiling. I scrambled to pick it up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. When I swung the light back to the closet, the door was open wider, definitely wider. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough to make my stomach twist into knots. Something was in there. I didn't know what, but I could feel it, a presence that didn't belong. I backed toward my bed, my eyes locked on the closet, waiting for something to lunge out. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, and this time I saw it clear as day. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just inside the closet. It wasn't human, not quite. Its edges were wrong, too sharp, too jagged, like it was made of broken glass. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice was gone, my body frozen. The shadow didn't move, but it was there, watching me. The lightning faded, plunging the room back into darkness, and I bolted for the door. I fumbled with the lock, my fingers clumsy with panic, and yanked it open, stumbling into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran, my socks slipping on the carpet, and didn't stop until I was downstairs, crouched behind the couch in the living room. My chest heaved, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The flashlight was still in my hand, its beam pointed at the floor, illuminating a patch of carpet that looked too normal for the terror I felt. I stayed there, curled up, listening. The storm was louder down here, the rain a constant roar, but I was straining for something else, those creaks, that scraping, anything that would tell me if the shadow had followed me. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. I couldn't tell. Time felt broken, stretched out by fear. I kept picturing that shadow, its jagged edges, the way it seemed to lean toward me without moving. I wanted my parents. I wanted them to come home, to tell me it was okay, to make the house feel safe again. But they were miles away and I was alone with whatever was upstairs. I don't know what made me do it, but I crept out from behind the couch and tiptoed to the kitchen. The phone was still there, its receiver gleaming faintly in the dark. I thought about calling my mom, but what would I say? That I saw a shadow? That the closet was open? She'd think I was dreaming, or worse, she'd be mad that I was still awake. Instead, I grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer, the biggest one I could find. It felt heavy, wrung in my small hands, but it made me feel a little braver. I wasn't going back upstairs, not yet. But I wasn't going to hide forever either. I crouched in the kitchen, the knife clutched tight in one hand, the flashlight in the other, its beam pointed at the floor like I was afraid to shine it anywhere else. The storm outside was a constant roar, the rain hammering the windows, the wind rattling the house like it wanted to tear it apart. But it was the silence inside that scared me most, the kind of quiet that felt like it was waiting for something to happen. I kept replaying that shadow in my mind, its jagged edges, the way it seemed to fill the closet without moving. My 9-year-old imagination was running wild, conjuring images of monsters, burglars, or something worse, something I didn't have a name for. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was in my house and I was alone. I stayed there, pressed against the kitchen cabinets, my knees pulled up to my chest. The knife felt cold against my palm, its weight both comforting and terrifying. I'd seen my dad use it to chop vegetables, but now it was my only defense. I didn't know what I'd do if I had to use it. Could I? The thought made my stomach churn. I wasn't a hero, not like the ones in my comics. I was just a kid, scared out of my mind, trying not to cry. The rain kept pounding, a steady rhythm that should have been soothing but only made me feel more trapped. I kept glancing at the hallway, expecting to see that shadow slink down the stairs, its jagged form filling the doorway. But there was nothing, just darkness and the faint glow of the hallway light I'd left on. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point I noticed something new, a faint smell, sharp and metallic, like wet rust. It wasn't strong, but it was there, cutting through the musty air of the house. I sniffed, frowning, trying to place it. It wasn't the rain, not quite. It reminded me of the time I'd cut my finger on a rusty nail in the backyard, the way the blood smelled when it mixed with the dirt. My heart skipped a beat. Was it coming from upstairs? From the closet? I didn't want to think about it, but my mind wouldn't stop. I pictured the shadow again, only this time it wasn't just a shape, it was holding something, dripping, leaving a trail of that smell behind it. I shook my head, trying to push the image away. I needed to focus, to do something. Hiding wasn't enough anymore. I thought about checking the doors again, making sure everything was locked, but the idea of moving through the house felt like walking into a trap. Instead, I crawled to the living room, keeping low, the knife and flashlight still in my hands. The couch looked safe, familiar, but I didn't trust it anymore. I slid under the dining room table instead, pulling the chairs in to shield me. The tablecloth hung down, creating a little cave of fabric and wood. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. I curled up, the knife resting on my lap, the flashlight pointed at the floor, its beam a small circle of light in the dark. That's when I heard it, a thud, heavy and deliberate, from upstairs. Not a creak, not a scrape, but something solid, like a footstep on the landing. My breath caught and I pressed myself against the table leg, my eyes wide. Another thud, then another, slow and measured, coming down the stairs. I clicked off the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs and I held my breath, waiting. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. I strained my ears, trying to hear over the storm, but there was nothing. Had I imagined it? Was it just the house again? I wanted to believe that, but the metallic smell was stronger now, clinging to the air like a warning. I don't know what made me do it, but I peeked out from under the tablecloth just enough to see the hallway. The light was still on, casting long shadows across the floor. And there, at the edge of the light, I saw it, a pair of boots, caked in mud, standing just outside the living room. They weren't my dad's boots or my mom's. They were too big, too worn, the laces frayed and dangling. My heart stopped. I ducked back under the table, my hands shaking so badly the knife almost slipped from my grip. Whoever it was, they were in my house. They'd been upstairs, in the guest room, in my room. And now they were here, just steps away. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. I clutched the knife tighter, my mind racing. I had to do something, run, hide, fight, but all I could do was sit there, frozen, waiting for the boots to move. I sat under the dining room table, my body pressed against the cold floor, the knife trembling in my hand. The boots hadn't moved. They stood there, just beyond the edge of the tablecloth, silent and heavy, like they were waiting for me to make a sound. The metallic smell was stronger now, sharp and sour, mixing with the damp, musty air of the storm. My mind was a mess, flipping between panic and denial. Maybe it was a neighbor checking on me because of the storm. Maybe my parents had sent someone. But those boots, those muddy, worn-out boots, didn't belong to anyone I knew. They were wrong, just like the open closet door, just like the shadow I'd seen upstairs. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it all out, but the image of those boots burned into my mind, their laces frayed like spiderwebs. The storm roared outside, a clap of thunder shaking the house, and I flinched, the knife scraping against the floor. I froze, my heart in my throat, waiting for the boots to react. But they didn't. They stayed still, unmoving, like the person wearing them was listening, waiting for me to give myself away. I bit my lip to keep from whimpering, my breath shallow and uneven. I wanted to scream, to call for my parents, but they were miles away, probably sipping wine at their fancy event, unaware that their kid was hiding under a table with a stranger in the house. The thought made me angry, but it also made me feel small, helpless, like I was shrinking into the shadows. Minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an hour. The boots didn't move, but the silence was worse than any sound. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I kept thinking about the shadow in the closet, its jagged edges, the way it seemed to watch me. Was that what was standing there now, wearing those boots? The idea made my skin crawl, but I couldn't shake it. I tightened my grip on the knife, my palm sweaty, and tried to think. I could run for the door, but it was across the living room, past the boots. I could try the back door, but that meant crossing the kitchen, where the light would expose me. Hiding was all I had, but even that felt temporary, like a game I was destined to lose. Then finally, the boots moved. Not toward me, but away toward the kitchen. I heard the faint squelch of mud on the hardwood, each step slow and deliberate, like the person was trying not to make noise. I peeked out again, just enough to see the boots disappear around the corner. The metallic smell lingered, stronger now, and I noticed something else, a faint trail of wet, dark smudges on the floor, leading from the hallway to the kitchen. My stomach twisted. Was it mud? Water? Or something worse? I didn't want to know, but I couldn't stop myself from staring at those smudges, their edges uneven like they'd been smeared by something heavy. I waited, counting my breaths, until I was sure the boots were gone. The kitchen was silent now, no footsteps, no creaks. I crawled out from under the table, my knees aching, and pointed the flashlight at the floor. The smudges were still there, a jagged line of dark streaks that glistened in the light. They weren't just mud. They were too red, too thick, like someone had dragged something bloody across the floor. My breath caught and I backed away, the knife shaking in my hand. I wanted to run, to get out of the house, but the storm was still raging and I didn't know where the person had gone. What if they were still here, waiting in the dark? I crept toward the living room, keeping the flashlight low, my eyes darting to every shadow. The front door was locked, the windows secure, but that didn't make me feel better. Someone had gotten in. Someone had been upstairs, in my room, leaving trails of whatever that was. I thought about the phone again, but the idea of standing still to make a call felt like asking to be caught. Instead, I moved to the couch, crouching behind it, the knife still in my hand. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the rain. I kept picturing those boots, the smudges, the shadow. What did they want? Why were they here? The questions spun in my head, each one worse than the last. Then, from the kitchen, I heard a new sound, a soft clatter, like something metal hitting the counter. My blood ran cold. They were still here. They hadn't left. I gripped the knife tighter, my mind racing. I needed a plan, but all I could think about was hiding, surviving, making it until morning. The storm would end. My parents would come home. I just had to stay alive until then. I stayed crouched behind the couch, the knife digging into my palm, my eyes fixed on the dark archway leading to the kitchen. The clatter had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, heavy with the promise of something waiting just out of sight. The metallic smell lingered, sharp and unsettling, mixing with the damp air of the storm. Those smudges on the floor haunted me, their reddish hue glowing in my memory like a warning I couldn't ignore. I kept picturing the boots, the way they'd stood so still, like their owner was listening for me. My 9-year-old mind was caught in a loop, torn between wanting to run and knowing there was nowhere to go. The storm outside was a wall of noise, rain and thunder blending into a roar that made it impossible to hear anything else. But I was listening, straining for the smallest sound, a footstep, a breath, anything that would tell me where they were. The phone rang again, its shrill cry cutting through the tension like a blade. I jumped, nearly dropping the knife, my heart slamming against my ribs. It was the landline in the kitchen, the same one my mom had called earlier. I wanted to ignore it, to stay hidden, but what if it was her? What if she was checking on me, or worse, what if she was coming home early? I couldn't let it ring forever, it would draw attention, make noise, give me away. I crept toward the kitchen, keeping low, the flashlight off to avoid being seen. The smudges on the floor gleamed faintly in the dim light from the hallway, their edges irregular, like they'd been smeared in a hurry. I avoided stepping on them, my stomach churning at the thought of what they might be. I reached the phone on the fourth ring, snatching it up with a trembling hand. Hello? I whispered, my voice barely audible. It was my dad this time, his voice calm but tired, asking if I was okay, saying they were still stuck at their friend's house because of the storm. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything, the shadow, the boots, the smudges, but the words wouldn't come. I was afraid he'd think I was making it up, or worse, that he'd be angry I hadn't locked everything like they'd told me. I'm fine, I lied again, my eyes darting to the dark corners of the kitchen. I could still smell that metallic tang, stronger now, like it was coming from somewhere close. My dad kept talking, telling me to stay safe, to go to bed soon, but I barely heard him. I was listening for something else, something in the house. When I hung up, the silence was suffocating. I stood there, clutching the phone, the knife in my other hand, my eyes scanning the room. The smudges led toward the back door, but it was still locked, the deadbolt untouched. I checked it anyway, my fingers shaking as I twisted the knob. It held firm, but that didn't make me feel better. If they hadn't left through the door, where were they? I turned, pointing the flashlight at the hallway, half expecting to see those boots again. But there was nothing, just the smudges, trailing off into the dark. I followed them with the beam, my heart pounding, and saw they led to the basement door. It was closed, but there was a fresh smudge on the handle, dark and wet like someone had touched it. My breath caught. The basement. I hadn't checked it. I never went down there. It was dark, damp, full of boxes and cobwebs, the kind of place where nightmares lived. But now I couldn't ignore it. What if they were down there, hiding, waiting? I backed away, my mind racing. I couldn't go down there, not alone, not with a kitchen knife and a flashlight. But I couldn't stay here either, not with those smudges staring at me like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to something awful. I thought about running to a neighbor's house, but the storm was too wild, the rain too heavy. I'd be soaked, exposed, and what if they followed me? I moved back to the living room, my steps slow, deliberate, the knife held out in front of me. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I checked the windows again, tugging at each one, making sure they were locked. The storm was louder now, the wind screaming through the trees outside, but I kept hearing that clatter in my head, the sound of something metal hitting the counter. I shone the flashlight around the kitchen looking for anything out of place. That's when I saw it, a wrench lying on the counter near the sink. It wasn't ours. My dad kept his tools in the garage, and this one was old, rusted, its handle stained with something dark. My stomach dropped. It was the same metallic smell coming from the wrench. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. But I knew it hadn't been there before. I backed away, my heart racing, and tripped over something soft. It was my backpack left by the couch from earlier. I grabbed it, thinking I could stuff some things inside and make a run for it if I had to. But as I unzipped it, I found something else, a piece of cloth, damp and heavy, stuffed inside. I pulled it out, my hands shaking, and held it up to the flashlight. It was a rag, stained with the same reddish smudge as the floor. I dropped it, my breath hitching, and scrambled back under the table. They'd been here. They'd touched my things. And they were still in the house. I stayed under the dining room table until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, the storm finally easing into a soft drizzle. The knife was still in my hand, my fingers cramped from gripping it so tightly. The flashlight had died sometime in the night, its batteries drained, leaving me in the dim glow of the hallway light. I hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, not since finding the rag in my backpack. The wrench on the counter, the smudges on the floor, the boots, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The metallic smell had faded, but it lingered in my memory, sharp and accusing, like it was burned into my senses. I kept waiting for the boots to come back, for that shadow to appear, but the house was silent now, too silent, like it was pretending nothing had happened. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me flinch, my heart racing as I braced for something to burst through the darkness. I kept picturing the basement door, that smudge on the handle, the wrench on the counter. I wanted to believe it was over, that whoever, or whatever, had been here was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still close, watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. My parents were supposed to be home soon, but what if they didn't come? What if I was stuck here, alone, with whatever had left those smudges? The sound of a car in the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. I crawled out from under the table, my legs stiff and aching, and peered through the living room window. It was my parents' car, the headlights cutting through the early morning mist. Relief flooded through me, so strong I almost cried, but it was mixed with a new kind of fear. What would I tell them? How could I explain the wrench, the rag, the smudges without sounding like I'd lost my mind? I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the wrench, and shoved it into a drawer, my hands shaking. The rag I stuffed back into my backpack, hiding it under my schoolbooks. The smudges on the floor were still there, faint now in the morning light, but I didn't have time to clean them. I heard the front door unlock, my mom's voice calling my name, and I forced myself to act normal, to push the fear down deep where they wouldn't see it. They found me in the living room sitting on the couch, the knife hidden under a cushion. My mom hugged me, apologizing for leaving me alone, her face tired but relieved. My dad ruffled my hair, joking about how I'd probably stayed up all night eating candy. I nodded, forcing a smile, my throat tight. I wanted to tell them everything, to spill it all, the shadow, the boots, the wrench, but I couldn't. They'd think I was making it up, or worse, they'd realize I hadn't locked the doors right away, that I'd messed up. So I stayed quiet, letting their voices wash over me, trying to pretend the house was safe again. But it wasn't. I could still feel it, that heavy watching presence, like the house was keeping a secret I wasn't supposed to know. That day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, breakfast, cartoons, helping my mom unpack her bag, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway, to the basement door. I didn't go near it. I couldn't. My parents didn't notice the smudges, or if they did, they didn't say anything. I kept waiting for them to find something, to ask questions, but they didn't. By lunchtime, I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined it all, if the fear had twisted my mind into seeing things that weren't there. But then I opened my backpack to grab a pencil, and there was the rag, its reddish stain stark against the fabric. It was real. It had all been real. I didn't sleep in my room that night. I told my parents I wanted to camp out on the couch, and they let me, thinking it was just a kid thing. I kept the hallway light on, the knife tucked under my pillow, my eyes fixed on the staircase. The storm was gone, but the fear wasn't. It clung to me, heavy and cold, like the air in the house that night. I kept thinking about the basement, about what might be down there, about the person who'd left those smudges. Had they left? Or were they still here, hidden in the shadows, waiting for another chance? I didn't know, and that was the worst part. The not knowing, the wondering, the feeling that I'd never be safe in my own home again. Years passed, but that night never left me. I was 22, home from college for the summer, when I finally told my parents what happened. We were sitting in the same living room, the same couch where I'd hidden all those years ago, the memory still as sharp as the knife I'd clutched. The house hadn't changed much, same faded carpet, same creaky stairs, but I wasn't the same. I'd grown up, moved out, built a life, but the fear from that night had rooted itself deep, sprouting into nightmares and a lingering unease every time I was alone. I'd kept it locked away, too scared to admit how much it had shaped me, but that summer, something broke. Maybe it was being back in the house, feeling the weight of those old shadows. Maybe it was just time. Whatever it was, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told them everything, the shadow in the closet, the boots, the smudges, the wrench, the rag. My voice shook as I spoke, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting for years. My parents listened, their faces shifting from confusion to concern. My mom's eyes widened when I mentioned the smudges, her hand covering her mouth. My dad leaned forward, his brow furrowed, asking questions I didn't have answers to. Why hadn't I told them? Why had I hidden it? I tried to explain, to make them understand the fear, the shame of failing their trust, but it sounded weak even to me. I was 9, I said. I didn't know what to do. But the truth was, I'd been terrified they wouldn't believe me, that they'd think I was just a scared kid making up stories. When I finished, there was a long silence. My mom got up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. My dad stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. A few weeks after that night, a neighbor had reported a break-in a few streets over. Nothing was stolen, but the house had been trashed, and there were strange marks on the floor, red, smeary, like someone had dragged something through the rooms. The police had found a wrench in the backyard, rusted and stained, but they couldn't trace it. No one was caught, and the case went cold, but the neighbors swore they'd seen someone lurking in the woods behind our house the night of the storm. My dad hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a coincidence, a small-town mystery. But now hearing my story, he wasn't so sure. My mom added something else. The basement door, the one with the smudge, had always stuck after that night, like something had jammed the lock. My dad had to replace it a year later, and when he did, he found scratches on the inside, deep and uneven, like someone had clawed at it. They'd never told me, thinking it was just wear and tear, but now it felt like a piece of the puzzle I'd been missing. I sat there, my heart pounding, the memories flooding back. The shadow, the boots, the wrench, they weren't just in my head. Someone had been in our house, leaving traces I was too young to understand. But who? And why? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, and I realized they probably always would. That night changed me. I still check every lock before bed, still flinch at unexplained noises. I don't sleep in the dark anymore, not really. The house is still my home, but it's never felt safe, not the way it did before. I don't know who was in my room that night or what they wanted, but I know they were real. And sometimes when the rain falls hard and the house creaks, I can still feel them watching, waiting in the shadows I'll never fully escape. Thank you all for sticking with me through this story. It's been tough to relive, but sharing it feels like letting go of a little piece of that fear. Stay safe out there, lock your doors, and maybe keep a light on. You never know who might be watching.